Sexual assault on college campuses. It's a crime, but schools themselves can run afoul of the law if the way they handle the offenses results in a climate of gender discrimination. It's Academe Today. Sexual assault on college campuses. A tough topic, but we're going to talk about prevention efforts, treatment, and the law for higher education. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jamie Liddy, the Director of Broadcasting here at UNCP. With me today to talk is Ms. Erin, a counselor and advocate for victims of sexual assault, and Ms. Ronette Gerber, the Director of Title IX Compliance at UNCP. Thanks for joining me and welcome to the TV studio.
Thank you.
This is your first time here, right?
It is.
Mm-hmm. All right, next time maybe a more pleasant topic, but today we're talking about sexual assault. And what do we know about the prevalence of sexual assault on college campuses today? Because for decades we heard from the Department of Justice statistics that 1 in 4 college women will be raped by the time she graduates. What do we know today?
I would say that those statistics are still relevant and on point. I know that they vary just depending on the source, but I'd say 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 is pretty consistent from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. And then college-aged men, like 18 to 24, who are students, are also more likely to be survivors of sexual assault or sexual violence compared to non-students in that same age range as well.
And when we say by the time he or she graduates, doesn't that belie the fact that it's really in the first semester even that a student is likely to be the victim of a sexual assault?
Yes, that is a time where people are more particularly vulnerable, would be as freshmen, and particularly from some of the research that I've read would be between the months of like August and November. I want to say it's even as much as 57% I saw in one of the studies that was a really large study of sexual assaults that they had polled colleges for had occurred during that time frame of those months.
Lots of factors are blamed as contributing factors to sexual assault in college, like living in proximity to each other, alcohol lowering inhibitions, alcohol abuse leaving a potential victim incapacitated, even miscommunication on dating, right? So what are some prevention efforts that have been tried on college campuses or at UNCP?
Well, definitely with alcohol and substance abuse, you nailed that right on the head. That is a huge precipitating factor. And so through our office, the counseling office, we really try to include in any kind of prevention efforts, like when we get in front of students in any capacity, whether it be in a classroom setting or at an outreach event, when we talk to them about, say, substance use and substance abuse prevention, we want to include how that relates to sexual assault as well. So I know we talk to them about, knowing your limits, because a lot of students are not going to abstain from alcohol completely. So, knowing your limits, spacing out, your drinks, knowing how much you can drink as far as just your tolerance, and being able to still kind of keep that part of your brain somewhat online where you have better decision making, but then also just give them information about like safety tips, like watching your drink, like, having a plan when you go out as far as taking somebody with you or like a group of people so you all know you're not going to leave anyone. Also, I would say that what you mentioned about miscommunication, for us this year, that is a big target, strategic goal for us as far as to give students information and psychoeducation about consent. I've developed a program based on a TED Talk from an educator that I found online. It's a really good program about how sex is like pizza. To equate that instead of the old baseball analogy. So we have that offered to student groups and student organizations, and we have some things set up where we're going to go into the classroom and talk to students about that, and I already have. And also just really any kind of outreach, any opportunity that someone reaches out to us and says, like, we want you to come and talk to our students about, we're really plugging consent, because I feel like a lot of people think that, yeah, people already know what affirmative consent is, but I've found that there is still a lot of miscommunication about that on this campus. And you really have to make it very concrete for people to understand, because they've gotten a lot of messages prior to coming here.
And what about bystander programs, a so-called bystander who could be inspired to stop a potential victim from walking off, obviously drunk, with someone who might be predatory, or stopping that friend from being predatory? What about those kinds of programs?
Yeah, we offer that as well. We have a really great program called Who Are You? So we can come and talk to people, like groups in dorms. I've already done that this semester, and then also to individual classrooms. But yes, bystander intervention is like the second big strategic goal for interpersonal violence prevention this year from the counseling office, because it is the number one, like, it's supported by research that shows that, yes, this intervention is, like, it works. So teaching people how to look out for people and ways to intervene if you feel like something's a little off, that is a big predictor, big indicator. It actually does reduce instances of sexual violence, and there's research to support that. So you can't go, that's like the gold standard as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Ronette, you are the director of Title IX and Clery Act compliance, which sounds complicated, but starting with Clery briefly, the Clery Act is the federal law that says college campuses have to issue timely warnings of a threat to safety. Is that right?
Yes, that's part of it, yes.
Okay. And also reporting statistics of violent crimes. So you can talk about that a little bit?
Yes. The Clery Act is federal legislation that requires campuses to be more transparent to students, faculty, and staff, and to the public in general. We provide information about our safety policies, our processes. We provide our statistics for over a 3-year period for certain crimes that occur on campus, to include sexual violence. And we talk about how we provide notifications to the campus, whether through a timely warning notice, or that gets ratcheted up to situations where we need emergency notification. And there are some pretty tight requirements within the Clery Act. So part of getting this information out is through an annual security report that has to be issued by October 1st. The university issued its 2017 annual security report last week. And in it, again, we talked about all these safety issues. And it's on my website, it's on Police and Public Safety's website. It's also on every application for either employment or for our students to come to school here. So it's out, both the good and the bad, the ugly. And it's an effort for us to say to the public and to our students and to our employees, this is what's happening on our campus. You need to be aware. And what I always tell our students and our employees is we have a great police force on this campus, sworn officers, but they can't be everywhere at all times. And this is a way for us to make sure that we are all taking some ownership into our own safety and for the safety of those around us.
What about the volume of laws in education that's known as Title IX? For decades, we've only heard the concept of Title IX in relation to equity between men's and women's sports. How has Title IX been interpreted to say that colleges might botch their treatment of sex offense cases, right, to the point of creating a climate of gender discrimination?
Well, for nearly 40 years, Title IX did or was interpreted to be equity in sports. However, the word sports and athletics is not in the legislation at all. In 2011, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights issued what they call a Dear Colleague letter. And it basically said to the campuses, you don't get it. Title IX is about much, much more than just sports. And it was an effort on behalf of the Department of Education to say, look at your campus as a whole, from your classrooms to your workplace, your athletic fields, all programs and activities that a campus has, that you ensure that those involved do not experience sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. And when the Department of Education uses the word harassment, they're including sexual assault in that.
Mm-hmm. So they were looking for more sensitive treatment of alleged victims, or they were looking for campuses to do something that police departments couldn't? You know, what were they asking for in the Dear Colleague letter?
In the Dear Colleague letter of 2011 and the Q&A that was subsequent to that, they were saying to the universities, if you do have a report of sexual violence on your campus, you need to address it immediately. And you need to, in conjunction with the Clery Act, and within the Clery Act, the Violence Against Women Act, what the federal government was saying was, from beginning to end, ensure due process. Make sure you're treating the parties the same. Particularly for a victim or a survivor of sexual violence and specifically of rape, what we as a university were told to do was give some of the power back to that individual and let them be kind of in charge of the process. Mm-hmm. Which meant then offer your services and let the student decide. And that included whether or not there was going to be a criminal investigation. A lot of what we talk about when we talk about sexual violence are criminal, or they are crimes. And what we're saying to our students is you have the right to file, or you have the right not to file a criminal complaint as part of the university's efforts to help you. And whether that's our campus police or local law enforcement, as an institution, we don't preclude that student from that remedy. Mm-hmm. But as an institution, we also want to look at the allegation and do an investigation and look at a student who's being accused of sexual violence, treat that student fairly and provide due process, and a means to ascertain whether or not the allegation occurred or didn't occur, and if it did, hold that student accountable.
I'm glad you used the word survivor, because I kept saying victim of sexual assault. So, Erin, let's talk about services for survivors. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about UNCP in particular. A student who is sexually assaulted on campus, or even an off-campus apartment, right? Mm-hmm. They can go to student health, or what?
Yes, they can go to student health services. Student health services, actually on our campus, they provide routine gynecological testing, pregnancy testing, and STI testing. So they could go to student health services. If you're talking about medically, they could go to student health services. If it had been recent, like within 24 to 48 hours, I would recommend that somebody go to the local emergency room. Mm-hmm. To get a safe exam. They can be preemptively treated for STIs, and they do not have to. I mean, law enforcement, from what I understand in my experiences here so far, law enforcement is called, but that they can say, no, I don't want to press legal charges. And our local rape crisis center, Robeson County Rape Crisis Center, they always send a victim's or a survivor's advocate. Use those words kind of, sometimes they get interchanged. Mm-hmm. But send an advocate to let the person know like what their rights are and what resources are available to them. At the counseling center, all of our counselors are well equipped to provide treatment to a survivor of sexual assault. Myself and another therapist that we have there, Charlotte Suggs, were trained in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. and it's kind of like the Cadillac of treatment for trauma, so it's used with veterans and with violence survivors as well. And Charla is actually trained in trauma-sensitive yoga, which is, there's tons of research that shows how beneficial that is in that kind of treatment to kind of befriend your body once again where the scene of the crime occurred. And we also have a DBT, which is a dialectical behavior therapy group, which is going on right now and should be going on next semester, which provides a lot of skill building for emotional regulation, which sometimes that's really disrupted when somebody's gone through a traumatic experience. So there's a lot of resources on campus and in the community, I would say. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
They can go to the hospital in Lumberton, right, Southeastern Regional Medical Center. They might go to Student Health Services. They might go to the local rape crisis shelter. What if a student does not first seek help from one of those confidential sources? What are university employee obligations if a student comes first to, for example, a trusted faculty member to disclose?
On this campus, under Title IX, we have what's called responsible employees. And under the Clery Act, we have what's called campus security authorities. These are individuals who are mandatory reporters. It is not everybody on campus, but most of our employees fall into one or both of those categories. What we're looking for is, as an employee, what is your contact with students? So if we flip that, who does a student think they could go to who could actually help them? And on this campus, I think first and foremost, it's our faculty, because they are our frontline defense for dealing with our students. So they are both campus security authorities and responsible employees. Then I just look at whether or not an employee has significant contact with students or they supervise students or other employees. If any employee falls into those categories as to their actual job description, not so much their title, but their job description, then they're going to be either or a responsible employee or a campus security authority. And those individuals have a mandatory duty to report to me or campus police when they know or think they know that a sexual misconduct offense has occurred. If an employee is not one of those categories, I would like to think that should someone come to them, whether as a student or an employee, that they would do the right thing and let me know or let campus police know so that we can kind of set in motion some of the resources that we have available to us to help them.
So they would call you as the director of Title IX and Clery Act compliance to say, even maybe the student didn't outright disclose, but I have a serious suspicion he or she was about to tell me they were a victim of sexual assault or sexual battery, and then you handle it from there by calling the student? Or
I will attempt to communicate with the student. I encourage responsible employees and campus security authorities to notify the student and say, look, I'm a mandatory reporter and I'm going to be calling Ronette, and I encourage you to talk with her. I've had faculty come to me with students, and I've met faculty with students, and I've met staff members with students to kind of start the process. And that opens up a door for the student to ask for an investigation by me, maybe a concurrent investigation by campus police. Sometimes they don't want any type of investigation, and I try to steer them over to Erin and the counseling center so that they're at least receiving some sort of help. Throughout that process, as I'm dealing with what I call a reporting party, because I don't use the terms that Erin uses. I don't use victim and accused or survivor. I talk to them as a reporting party and a responding party because I'm a neutral fact finder. So I treat both parties equally. And I will work with them throughout the investigation to offer services from beginning to end. So a student may say, I'm in the same class with this person. Like, okay, well, let's look at what your options are. Or I'm in the same residence hall. Or this person keeps contacting me and I don't want that person contacted. So then I will issue a mutual, non-punitive no contact order between the two of
Right.
them.
I was going to ask you about those campus-based remedies
Yes.
for the reporting party and the student respondent, right?
Right.
Changing classes or changing residence halls, campus judicial proceedings, or is it only through your office? You know, I'm familiar with campus judicial for plagiarism or cheating on a
Right.
test. Is there a campus judicial for
Yes,
the respondent?
I am doing just the investigation and then a report. If at the end of my investigation, I think that the student, the respondent party, has violated the student sexual misconduct policy, I then write up a report. I share it with both parties. They get to review and edit my report. We talk about what's in it, and then a final report is then shared with them, and I send it to our Director of Student Conduct, who is now Dr. Jonathan Pettigrew. Dr. Pettigrew and I will talk about the case, and he will bring the parties in. If he agrees with me, that's the way our policy is written, if he agrees with me, he and the respondent party will decide how they want to adjudicate that case, because that student has the right to have it held as an administrative hearing with Dr. Pettigrew, or send it to the Student Conduct Board. And that, while the board itself is made up of faculty, staff, and students, if the matter is a sexual misconduct case, then only faculty and staff will be on the hearing board. And it will have an initial hearing, and then there are multiple levels of appeals for both parties.
Okay. So, Erin, there's nothing that would keep a professor from walking a student over to CAPS themselves, right? Counseling and Psychological Services, rather than merely disclose to Ronette, the student has, you know, told me this, but also I can walk them over to counseling.
Sure. And we've had, you know, faculty and staff do that before. Just like Ronette was just explaining about people walking students over to her office. I think sometimes it's just having somebody, you know, support you, you know, go through the door the first time.
What are some common myths or misperceptions about sexual assault, or on college campuses in particular? You know, men can be victims of sexual assault and probably have a bigger stigma or more reticent to report, but what are some other misperceptions?
I would say a big misperception is that the perpetrator's not known to the victim. You know, the misperception of that, you know, people who assault other people sexually are like, you know, in a dark corner, hiding, you know, somebody that you don't know, because in most cases it is somebody that is known to the survivor, and it's a lot of times occurs on dates. And then also that there's a lot of false reporting, because really the amount of false reporting is very minimal, like similar to other crime statistics, like 2 to 8% is the statistic that I keep coming across.
But it gets a lot of publicity when someone does make a false report. And then that belies the real statistic, which is that false report is actually quite infrequent.
I mean, because, yeah, I mean, to me, I'm like, why would somebody go through all the things that a survivor has to go through? You know, I mean, because it's not, I mean, to report, I mean, to bring attention to yourself and things like that. I mean, I feel like that's a lot that somebody has to go through in that process. So, yeah, that's a misconception, I believe.
And comments I've been seeing lately are that anytime a woman regrets, you know, a sexual encounter, that, oh, now suddenly it's sexual assault or sexual battery, right? The idea that rape claims on college campuses are regrets, not, you know, actual offenses. Do you get that, where the survivor feels guilt about what message did I send, or what did I do wrong, or?
As far as somebody who actually did consent, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like do they buy into the myth?
Oh,
You
yes. Yeah, that does happen, yes, where people sometimes feel like when somebody freezes, which is, you know, a part of our stress response, like fight, flight, and freeze, and sometimes when people have frozen and they say, well, I didn't say anything. I didn't say no, and kind of buying into that same, like victim blaming, like you're describing, and feeling like a sense of shame because that's unfortunately the culture on college campuses, which we really want to change, obviously. But I would say yes.
Ronette, how do you think UNCP is doing? I mean, you've seen the latest statistics. You said UNCP issued its Clery report just a couple of weeks ago. How do you think it's going?
I think that's akin to asking how our university does or compare with other universities, because campuses are so different, and their makeup is different, their resources are different, their structures are different. And what we've come to realize this past year, particularly in our system, our definitions are different. So when you start looking at the term sexual assault on our campus may not be a sexual assault on somebody else's campus, or vice versa. So you can't really compare the numbers. But when I look at our numbers have increased. And going back to 2014 when my position was created, that was part of our conversation. We knew our numbers would increase because by creating my office, the university was saying, we're going to take this topic and make it a priority, and we're going to give it the resources we think are necessary, which means it's going to become a dialogue on this campus, and it has become a dialogue on this campus. I'm thrilled to say that through the work that the Counseling Center has done, the Office of Student Conduct, our Police and Public Safety, Housing and Residence Life, and my office, we've made a concerted effort to get out on campus and talk to students, student groups, student classes, athletic teams. We've done everything we could to get in front of the students and our faculty and staff to say, one, this is an issue we need to talk about. And on this campus, as of 2015, we have a new policy. Let me introduce you to the new policy, which, by the way, is a consent-based policy. So now we're going to talk about consent. And when we do our presentations on consent, we spend a great deal of time kind of breaking it down for the students as to what we mean. And yes means yes. I mean, I tell the students, look for the yes. If you don't find the yes, don't engage. And it's been, I think, effective because our numbers have increased. Since 2014, just for the term sexual assault, and sexual assault on our campus is defined as a sexual touching without consent, from on one end of the spectrum to a rape case.
They're telling me we're just about out of time. I know we could talk about this a long time. It's a really important topic, but thank you so much for being here with me to explain the issues, the legal issues, and what resources there are for students. So thanks to Ms. Norrid and Ms. Gerber for the useful information, and thank you for watching. Thanks to Professor Dollard's TV production class. We'll be back, so be on the lookout for another episode of Academe Today.